worship the Lord, worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know Him must walk as He walked. Those who worship the Lord, worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know Him must walk as He walked. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is the life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is the life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light. If we say that we know Him, but we don't keep His word, then we walk in the darkness, and the truth's not in us. If we walk in the light, we will have fellowship sweet, and the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from sin. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is the life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is the life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is the life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is the life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light.
Well, good morning, friends. How's everybody doing this morning? Hopefully you're doing well, up and having a little bit of coffee or tea or whatever your favorite morning beverage may be. Me, a little bit of coffee here. That's what I'm enjoying. Hey, we are spending a few days talking about this conflict, and the question that was asked by Fran last week was why people hate the Jews so much. And hopefully in just the little thumbnail that we gave of just the first few hundred years, actually, of Jewish history has painted the picture for us. I mean, at the very beginning of it all, we see the family, the familial reasons why there's hatred, and then beyond the familial, Isaac and Ishmael, but then also the geopolitical, Abraham moving around to different places, ending up in a place in Canaan that wasn't even his place to begin with, and yet God said, I'll give you this place. And we can see why the people of that area, even to this day, some 3,000-4,000 years later, there's still angst about the Jewish people and what they stand for. So we're going to continue in that motif and that theme this morning. I'm going to try to paint with some broad brushstrokes to get us at least up to the New Testament, if I can, and that in and of itself will provide some semblance, some substantiation for why there's this hatred of the Jewish people. In fact, if I kind of keep it to broad brushstrokes and not get so much into the details today, we might actually be able to get into the 20th century, and that's skipping over a lot of ground, actually. So yesterday we talked about Abraham and Sarah, Abram and Sarai, who became Abraham and Sarah, not having children. And then finally Sarah says, look, you're getting old. You need to have kids. Your parts aren't going to keep working. You need to go have kids. So go have kids. That's a paraphrase just for the record. So here's Hagar. She's young. She's beautiful. You can have offspring through her. And being the man that Abraham was, he went, okay. And Ishmael was the result of that. That bred, no pun intended there, but it did breed some mistrust and jealousy between Sarah and Hagar. Hagar would then be banished. The Lord has kept his eye on Hagar and has heard her, but he's been watching over her, and makes the promise to Ishmael that he also would be a great nation. That's the case to today, a great nation. But that is also the source of the ongoing conflict that we see among especially the Middle Eastern peoples and the Jewish people, even to this day. Now, you fast track to, you go to Isaac. Isaac would have some kids, and two of Isaac's kids were Jacob and Esau. And actually, it was Esau and Jacob. Esau was born first, and yet in the end of it, at the death of Isaac, Jacob is the one who will be given the birthright blessing, the inheritance, if you will. And so Esau, who are now called the Edomites, I mean, that further family, familial issues driving peoples apart. And so we see those lingering issues right up and through into today. So, yes, there are times when they come back together, like in Genesis chapter 25, verse 9, Isaac and Ishmael come together. They bury their father. It seems like they're getting along, and yet that doesn't last real long either. Same thing is true when you go further into the book of Genesis. You see Jacob and Esau. They make some amends along the way, and yet there's still this deep-seated mistrust that is there. I mean, Jacob was a shyster, a manipulator, and his mother was too, for the record. He's the one that put on the fake hair on his arm, because apparently Esau had very hairy features and hairy arms and whatnot. And so the mother said, hey, put this skin on so when your father feels your arm, he'll think you're Esau. I mean, it was deceitful, absolutely deceitful. And we see these things along the way. I've said numerous times, if you want to shelter your children, don't have them read the Bible. And what we're looking at today, we think, well, if we understand all this, it's going to make life easier. No, it's going to show the complexities of humanity, and that's why we need a Savior. So you're going through the book of Genesis and just covering the book of Genesis, the problems coming out of Abraham, Isaac and Ishmael, and then Isaac to Jacob, Jacob and Esau. So now we see a kind of a fourfold split in the family that takes place here. And then when you get to Jacob, he has his own children, and they are fractious among themselves, because there's the one son who has these dreams. Remember his name? Joseph. Joseph has these dreams. He tells his brothers, his older brothers, about this dream, or about these dreams and how they would serve him and whatnot. They didn't like it much. So what did they do? They threw him in a pit. They sold him for money. And then they went and told their father that that the son had been lost and been eaten by ravenous animals and didn't know where he was and whatnot. And so you see further family issues taking place in the life of Abraham's lineage, Jacob and his kids having this issue. And we know what happens to Joseph. Joseph ends up being sold into slavery into Egypt, which is just kind of down around the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. Joseph grows to prominence to the point of being the prime minister of Egypt. Well, during a famine, Jacob's family, all the boys and the father, Jacob as well, will come down to Egypt because Joseph had the foresight through dreams that the Lord gave him to set aside food in storage bins so that when famine would hit, they would have food. And Jacob's boys knew this, Jacob knew this. They went down to Egypt, and they were spared, and they discovered that Joseph was alive, and that Joseph was the prime minister of Egypt and whatnot. But even then, throughout, really from Genesis chapter 12 all the way through to Genesis chapter 50, you see problems in Abraham's family, and it all stems back to there. Now, again, I said I want to cover some of the high points here, and otherwise we're not going to get through this. We know what happens from Joseph. Joseph is in Egypt. The family makes their way to Egypt, and they end up being there for 400 years. Now, let's think about where they're coming from. They had established themselves in the region that we would sometimes call Canaan. And they had property there and whatnot, but now they have left the Canaanite region, and they head to Egypt, and they end up being there 400 years. So the people who were living in Canaan, they built property, they built cities, they built businesses and all these things. So the people living in Canaan, what we would now think of the modern area of Palestine, would be thinking, well, this is our land. Jacob and his whole entourage have left. They're in Egypt. They haven't come back. It's been several hundred years since they've been here. They're probably not coming back. And so the people in the Canaan region felt secure and established. So there's number two. First, we have Abraham going there. He didn't. God told him to go there, so it's God's directive, and that's another thing that creates angst for some people. But God's directive that Abraham go to Canaan. Secondly, now we see the return of the Jews under the leadership of Moses coming back to Canaan, and we know that they didn't actually end up in Canaan. They ended up in the desert for a while. And then they would end up under the leadership of Joshua, crossing back over the Jordan River, which is at flood stage, and defeating Jericho and defeating the various people who live in the region. Now, when you just go to the book of Joshua, you can see the reason why people in the Middle East have angst against the Jews. Partly, and this is going to sound anti-everybody else. There's anti-Semitism. And what I'm about to say is going to sound anti-everybody else in the Middle East. God told them to wipe them out. God told Joshua to not leave the survivors unless they would come over to Jewish practices, in which case maybe they would have some allowance for the aliens. But what the Jewish people didn't do is they didn't follow God's directive. And by not following God's directive, in the days of Joshua, and it's harsh, it's brutal. I don't want to say that it's not. When God said to go wipe them out, it's awful, but it was what God directed them to do, and they did not follow through on that directive. And by not following through, they have allowed the seed, the root of all the hostility and all the bitterness that we see even unto today, right up until this day. So this is where so much of this comes from. I'm looking up a question. Because I want to give you a more specific date. So Joshua was leading the people in roughly 1355 BC. So you take the 2,000 years from us to Christ and you go back another 1,355 years. So, we're talking 3,500 years ago. And then you go back 400 years prior to that in the days of Israel in Egypt. So, now you're almost 4,000 years. Then you go back a few hundred years to the time of Abraham. You're 4,000 to 4,500 years of hostility that has built up, that has never gone away. And this is where all of this is coming from right up until today. Now, let's fast track a little bit further and consider some more history. Okay, so that's the days of Joshua. The people cried out. They wanted a king. God wasn't enough for them. Now, there's something about that, and that comes at the end of the book of Judges, where the people said that they wanted a king. Let me see if this is where this is located. They wanted a king, and it says this, it Judges 21:25, and so this is what happened. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit. Everybody was just doing their own thing, and that's kind of where we are in the modern world today. Hey, let people do their own thing. Let them do as they want to do. Nobody should be able to tell other people how to live and what they should practice and what they should do. And this is exactly where we are today. And now this verse feeds into our contemporary situation, especially in America, because those who are leftist would say everybody should be able to do what they want to do. Who are you to judge? Those on the right would say, well, the fact is, there is moral code, there is a moral compass, there are moral laws, there is right, there is wrong, and those on the left would say, yeah, the wrong is not letting people do what they want to do. That's what's wrong, and so people on the left are saying, let everybody do as they see fit, and so this is where we see all the sexual freedom, and liberty and confusion and so on. And so when you go back to the book of Judges, the very last verse, Judges 21:25, in those days Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit. Now, again, you can go through the book of Judges, and you can see the warring and the problems between the various tribes of the people of Israel. It's problematic. And that leads us, again, to where we are today. You get into the book of Samuel. Book of Samuel, we see the people wanting kings. They're granted a king. The first king was named Saul. Second king was David. David was a great king in many ways. I mean, he was a warring king. He was a king that God said, look, because blood is on your hands, I'm not going to allow you to build my temple. He raised the money for the temple. But he didn't get to build the temple. Solomon is the one that built the temple. But even there, you see problems. And then you get to Solomon, and then you go down to the next Rehoboam, who followed Solomon, and you begin to see these good kings and bad kings. And then you see a division of the land. There's the Israelites to the north, because there's a divided kingdom. The Israelites to the north, and then the people of Judah to the south, as the kingdom is divided after the time of Solomon, after the time of Rehoboam, the kingdom splits. And so even within Israel itself now, we see the division. This will leave room for several hundred years later for people like the Babylonians and the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans, all to invade the land, and really from those days, those partway through the Kings that you would read about in 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, you'd read about those things from those days, and then you get into the prophets like Isaiah and Daniel, and you see the invasion of the Babylonians and the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans. I left somebody out of the list there, but you see the invasion, and you see the people of Israel being taken out as hostages, being taken out as captives, and being placed into 70 years of captivity before they're allowed to go back. But then, even then, they don't have ownership of their own land. So you can go back probably close to 3,000 years and see how Israel, until 1948, did not actually have possession of its own land, because of by the time they came back, they were still under foreign rule. They did not get to rule themselves as their own nation. Yes, they were their own ethnic group, but as was the case in so much of that part of the world around the Mediterranean Sea, they were under rule of Persians. They were under the rule of the Greeks. They were under the rule of the Greeks being the Seleucids. They were under the rule of the Romans. And so you see why, again, from the Old Testament vantage point, there is so much angst. And you go through, then you get into the New Testament, and you again see the Greeks under Roman authority. Not the Greeks, I'm sorry, the Jews under Roman authority, and wanting to be set free, looking for someone to liberate them. Jesus comes promising to be that person, yet he was bringing a spiritual liberation, not a political liberation to the people. And so many of the Jews rejected Jesus because he wasn't setting them free from Roman oppression. Okay, we've got to the New Testament. We've gotten part way into the New Testament. Throughout the New Testament, in what is written in the New Testament, they are under Roman rule. Now you have another conflict that is existing. You have the conflict, at least the theological, the philosophical, and perhaps even to a certain measure, the political differences brought with the dawn of Christianity. So now you have another schism. You have the schism of Christianity and Judaism, which in the when you get to the time of the Crusades will be some of the most awful, heinous actions that take place in human history during the days of the Crusade. Probably maybe not as equal to what we saw in the world wars, but still, and it was all done under the banner of Christianity and Christian dominance and that type of a thing. And that's where you see some of that, perhaps even in American Christian nationalism. And we have to be careful that we do not become like the Crusaders, who use Christianity as substantiation for the awful atrocities that they committed in the Middle Ages. So, okay, we've gotten to the Middle Ages. We've gotten that far. And there's a lot of things that could be talked about, a lot of things I'm just glossing over. I think that you can see why people hate the Jews. Now, again, we looked at back in Genesis chapter 12. God says that those who bless Israel will be blessed. Those who curse Israel will be cursed. That's why we would choose to bless Israel. That's why we pray for Israel. Last week, we talked about some of the spiritual reasons that Satan wanted Israel to fail so that Messiah wouldn't come. Well, okay, we need to get up into the 600s AD, and you have the dawn of Islam. Now, Islam, the people of Esau, and the people of Esau would be called the Edomites, and the people of Ishmael, also being a group of people. You're thinking of the people in Iraq. You're thinking of the people you're thinking of Syrian people. You're thinking the Kurds. You're thinking people in Turkey. Those are all descendants out of the line of Esau. And so, again, you go back and you think about the conflict between Jacob and Esau, and you see why there is all this tension that surrounds Israel to this day in the Middle East, and what the nature of all the problems are. There's geopolitical reasons, there's inheritance reasons, there's family issues, there are issues of greed and riches. We talked about yesterday how when Abraham came back from Egypt, he came with all this wealth and all these cattle and all these things, and so you see how that contributed. You get into the last millennia, 1000 to 1999. Remember Y2K. In all of those years, during those years, the Jewish people were the ones that would lend money to people, and they charged some interest, and that's where they got a lot of their wealth. And so you get into the 1900s, and you see Hitler, and you see him pointing to the Jews and all their wealth and saying they've stolen this wealth, even though the Jewish population was such a small population compared to what we see on planet Earth today, or compared to what you see among all the other nations in that time. And Hitler was blaming the Jews and saying, look, they want to control the world, they want to control the wealth. During times like the Black Plague, they were accused of poisoning people's water wells, which really wasn't true, but they had to blame somebody. Israel became the scapegoat anytime that there was something like a plague that took place, and the Black Plague that came. And again, people pointed to them and blamed them, even though people would go and prove that, that was all conspiracy and it was fallacious. There was no fact to it. Many people chose to hold on to that. You get to the 1900s, the Jewish people are dispersed all over the world. And you get to November 2nd, which I can remember because that's my birthday, in 1917, the Balfour Declaration that begins to give at least some credence to Israel being able to be in the land of Canaan. And then you see British control and French control over that area. The entire Middle East was controlled by the British and the French to the north, the British to the south. So it was colonialized in that way. And so people look back and they remember that, and there was a great disdain for how that happened. In 1947, the British people said, we're going to pull out. And so they pulled out and said, you guys are on your own. And that's when 1948, May 14th, I think was the date, 1948, the declaration that Israel would be its own state. It was their own declaration, and the UN signed off on that. And then that went into, okay, but what about the Palestinians? What do we do with that? And from 1948 until right now, we still see the same issues going on. And I haven't even gotten into all that takes place there with Jewish people being interspersed with Palestinians, and how the Palestinians were given the region of Gaza, the Palestinians were given the region of the West Bank, and yet many Jews would move in and set up their own communities in those areas, and that itself has led to great angst. And so here we are today. Friends, I'm probably not going to go a lot further. I probably could go further. I could talk about all the Palestinians who were displaced in wars, all the Palestinians who were displaced through international United Nations decisions, so much of this. Now, what does this have to do with us? it just paints the picture of how we got to where we are today. And again, I've only gotten us up into like the 1940s. I haven't gone further than that to talk about anything beyond that. But I hope that you can see why there's so much hatred for the Jews. What position should we have? Well, I believe we should have the position of being for all people, praying for all people, because they all need the Savior. They all need Jesus, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Palestinian, whether they're Syrian, whether they're Turkish, whether they're Iranian, whether they're Iraqi, whatever, Jordanian, British, Scottish, Japanese, people all over the world need Jesus.